Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be concentrating on how the theme of gender is put forward by J.B. Priestley in An Inspector Calls. Priestley establishes that 1912 Edwardian Britain is a patriarchal society, and we learn this more and more as events unfold across the play. We can even juxtapose the experience of young women by concentrating on what happens to Sheila versus what happens to Eva, with class being the big difference between the two of them. It's important to note that the play opens with Sheila getting engaged to Gerald Croft, and this establishes her safety from struggle through marriage. Even though she's a wealthy woman, marriage is still her first defence from being vulnerable. It's important to note that every time something shocking is being revealed, Sheila is encouraged to leave the room. It's as if to shield her and perhaps preserve her innocence, but it's almost as if her parents do not want her to know the matters of the world. In contrast, Mr. Burling, Eric and Gerald all use Eva or Daisy and disregard her when it suits them. It's ironic, as it contrasts with the notion of the time anyway, that these men of that class would be gentlemen. Eva is depicted as a tarnished woman. She is judged for her circumstances, and it's as if she has lost her place in society. Without a male figure to steer her, she is hugely at a loss. And victims, as women, we could have seen as just at the hands of men. But we also learn that women like Mrs. Burling are just as responsible. They hold power. And whilst in a patriarchal society it's men who hold power and wield it against victims or the vulnerable like women, actually here we also see a powerful rich woman holding it against a poorer woman. It's important to note, in terms of gender, Priestley definitely puts forward the argument that men and women see each other as mysterious creatures across this play and don't really understand each other at all. Perhaps Priestley concentrates on our victim as Eva or Daisy because she is weakened by poverty, and by virtue of being a woman alone in Edwardian Britain, and also on top of that a pregnant woman alone in Edwardian Britain, the odds are stacked against her. To learn that she has killed herself seems like the only escape, in a very bleak way, against the crisis that she has of being so vulnerable. But as we unfold these quotes, we want to unpack what else Priestley is saying about gender. Now, Sheila, don't tease him. When you're married, you'll realise that men with important work to do sometimes have to spend nearly all their time and energy on their business. Now here we have Mrs. Burling in Act 1 giving maternal advice, chastising her daughter for mocking Gerald. He's saying he was busy last summer. She's being instructed not to tease, as if she's still a child. It's important for us to realise that men are given this identity here in the working world and the public sphere with important work, as opposed to the domestic worries or the more trivial life it's implied that women have at this time. It's interesting also that Sheila is being infantilised, made to seem more like a child. And this idea that she should accept that she should have been ignored the previous summer is something that her mother is endorsing. She is supporting Gerald. It's ironic, as we will learn, that Gerald was not working last summer, but with Daisy instead. If anything, his pursuit was pleasure, not business. So all his time and energy was not on business. Priestley allows Mrs. Burling to be the mouthpiece of men, and in a way she is a huge example of how patriarchy works. She's a woman who's lived in patriarchy for so long that the semantic field of importance that she uses on the roles that men play, with words such as time, energy and business, drawing further attention to how male privilege operates and how the idea that a man should be shielded from being judged for their actions. It's important also to then contrast that with how the inspector views things in Act 1. He says, your daughter isn't living on the moon. She's here in Bromley too. The inspector is clear here that Sheila should not be hidden away from reality, much to her parents' dismay and anger. But it's an example of how sheltered her life is, that they don't want her to understand the world around her. The contrast of the moon from Bromley is comic, but it also accentuates how ignorant her parents seek for her to be on important issues, like the death of a poor girl. Once more, Sheila is also referred to in terms of her status, in terms of who she belongs to, and each person she belongs to is a man. She is a daughter to one man, and she's now a fiancée to another. Her understanding and ideas of her world are not cultivated, really, without the support of the inspector. And she grows as a woman as the play unfolds. The inspector corners Gerald here when he says, "You think women ought to be protected against unpleasant and disturbing things." Gerald's just narrated how he first met Daisy, as she was getting cornered by old McGarty, who was totally drunk and acting in quite an oblivious, obnoxious way. And Gerald's defending his position of protecting Daisy, and the inspector is not really buying it. It's important for us to also question the reality that Gerald saw himself, to some extent, as a prince, or at least that's what Sheila will sarcastically call him later. But we know that Priestley is drawing attention through the inspector here at the idea that that isn't good enough. Gerald is aware of the unpleasant and disturbing things that go on by the power dynamic of a man against a woman. And the adjectives that the inspector uses here of unpleasant and disturbing are euphemistic descriptions of more sinister things and misuses of power, whether we consider that harassment, rape. It's dark stuff that we're drawing attention to here. It's more chilling in Act 2 for us then to learn of how Mrs. Burling treats this woman. She's intensely judgmental, as she says. She was claiming elaborate fine feelings and scruples that were simply absurd of a girl in her position. She totally overlooks this woman's need to be cared for as absurd. She's so dismissive, and this is heightened through the verb claiming, as it implies that this girl's view is not valid because she was pregnant and in that position. The innocence of the girl is amplified through the language of elaborate fine feelings and scruples. And this is ironic because this is not what Mrs. Burling is trying to put forward for us. It contrasts the overbearing nature of her, Mrs. Burling, as a hugely critical woman misusing her power in a charitable situation. Priestley is crystallising for us that we should be alarmed as an audience at how someone with power could not use that power correctly. And it echoes his socialist concern at how power is given to a few wealthy individuals and how they misuse it. By Act 3, the inspector is not holding back. You used her as if she were an animal, a thing, not a person. He is talking to Eric here. And Gould is drawing attention to the predatory behaviour of Eric. The verb used shows how selfish, casual and callous Eric has been in his interactions with the girl. The semantic field of devaluing imagery is conveyed best through the nouns, whether it's animal, thing, not a person. The inspector is restating that Eric made the girl a victim and caused her suffering, if nothing else, by putting her in a position where she was pregnant and she didn't want to even be with him sexually. The revelations of Eric in Act 3 echo a sinister concern for a younger generation male who felt entitled to a pretty girl. Priestley uses Gould to share his frustration at the entitlement of men here. Whilst Eric later learns his actions were wrong, the audience may be left uneasy at the expectations of women and men. They might wonder if post-war Britain had really moved gender roles any further to equality than in this time. And there might even be a few in the audience who wondered if it should be moving towards equality at all. But the play offers that thought piece. She didn't want to marry me, said I didn't love her. That's what Eric claims in Act 3. And Eric narrates the valid reasons why he didn't marry the girl. She didn't want to, as he knew, she knew, they both did, that they didn't love each other. Perhaps this is signalling the integrity in a personal crisis that this woman had. The negative contractions didn't present a bleak reminder of the difference between them, if nothing else by class. Eric narrates also as if the girl genuinely had a choice. Was that really the case? Would he have married a girl of lower class than him? Would his parents have allowed it? I doubt it. Priestley is once more enlightening us on how limited the options were for the destitute poor woman. Her most tragic moment is falling pregnant, and Priestley could be critiquing the importance of giving women a choice to abort legally. And it's important to note that that decision legally doesn't come into play until 1967. That's some 22 years after the play is first performed. If nothing else, though, Priestley uses his play as a huge forum to consider the way that gender operates. The idea of masculinity might seem pivotal because these men seem weak in their ways of managing these situations with women. But equally, the idea of being a woman is not seen as a pivotal moment of strength in this play. If anything, it makes you more vulnerable, especially if you're poor, especially if you're pregnant, and especially if you don't have a man holding your hand. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?